Hi everybody, welcome to episode 2 of the 5th season of What We Read. I still can't believe we've been doing this for half a decade.
Kind of wild, imagine? It's true. It's like a tiny toddler if it had been born at the time and was in corporeal form.
Anyway, we're going to split this video into 2 parts. There's the part where I talk about a lot of random fantasy books, and then the second part is going to be where we talk about Grishaverse books.
Just the one random fantasy verse.
Random? How dare you? Anyway, I'm going to speed quickly through the other books,
or
try to, in any case. The first book that I'm going to quickly talk about is At Grave's End, which is by Janine Frost, and it is the 3rd book in the Night Hunter series. This is a series that I've been reading with my friend Rachel from Hello Chelly, because we're doing our, annual paranormal series event. And this premise centers around Kat, who is half human, half vampire. She's been hunting down vampires because she's trying to find her deadbeat vampire dad, who impregnated her mom and who she wants to kill. Along the way, she ends up crossing paths with a vampire bounty hunter named Bones. They end up forming a sort of relationship. Starts as a partnership, ends as a romance. And in this 3rd book, the stakes have gotten even higher for these two because of what happened at the end of the 2nd, and because I'm not going to spoil anything, I will say that I love how Janine Frost just escalates the situation in every single book. So far she's managed to keep it very different every single time, which I really appreciate considering that the main couple is still Cat and Bones. And I normally am not big on reading series where the main couple stays the same for so long, like unless you're giving me more couples on the side,
Right.
So I love it because it still makes me laugh, it still makes me emotional. Like, there were a lot of high stakes scenes in this one, and I really enjoyed that a lot. I've still been listening to them on audiobook, and that has been a great decision for me because I just am so entertained. Even though it also means that people sometimes look at me funny because I'm too busy like laughing to myself or being like, so, good times all around. I will be continuing the series, reading through the end of it to, wrap up all of my feelings for you, so watch out for that blog event in October. The other book that I'm going to talk about that I don't own physically is The House in the Cerulean Sea. I read that one with my sisters and my cousin, nice. And it is the most Pixar movie story I've ever read in a book. At least as far as I can recall anyway, because the premise of it is that there is a man named Linus, and he works for a government corporation that basically monitors all of these orphanages around the country, and it's Linus's job to check on the standards of living and make sure that the kids are happy and thriving and well in these orphanages. He gets sent on a very special mission to visit the Marcias orphanage, which is on an island in the middle of the Cerulean Sea, and he is warned beforehand that the inhabitants are kind of unusual, possibly dangerous, and so he really has to keep his eyes peeled and see what's going on over there. But when he gets to the island, he discovers that maybe everything is not as it has been painted out to be,
which is lovely.
Especially as he gets to know the residents of the orphanage, including the caretaker of the orphanage.
Lovely caretaker.
It was just lovely is actually the best word to describe it, if I'm being honest. It really feels like reading a Pixar movie because I listen in on their book club like a creeper. There's sort of a vibe to it that is whimsical and wonderful, but as with most Pixar things, there is an underlying theme that's woven in all throughout and sort of gets revealed at the end of it. I will say TJ Klune is a little bit more heavy-handed with the delivery of that set of themes in this particular story. I didn't mind too much, but I think other people might find it a little bit more in your face.
I guess heavy-handed, but sure.
Yeah, in your face is heavy-handed. Either one would work as an explanation for that. But I did find it very charming because I really enjoyed the characters. The story was like pretty average. It's kind of predictable in the way that if you've read a lot of stories with similar vibes, you'd probably be able to guess what happens. But I did really enjoy the characters, and at the end of the day, that's really the part of the novel that stands out to me. I found it really cute just to see like everyone sort of grappling with different things, having different identities. I like seeing all the different relationships form. I like the found family vibes to it. It was really, really cute. The thing is, this book has been hyped up so much, and I know a lot of people considered it their favorite read of 2020. and they reread it, they love it so much, and I really enjoyed it, but I actually don't think I loved it quite as much as other people did. I think it is objectively good. I think it's great for people who are not big fantasy readers. One of my sisters is not, and it still worked really well for her. So in that sense, I feel like it's a very accessible story that a lot of other people will enjoy and will want to read. And it also has a very cute cover. But as for me, I'm like, I liked it. Not completely a new favorite. I don't think I'm head over heels for it, but it was definitely worth the read. Couple more things before we move on to our Grisha verse feelings. So the first thing I'm going to talk about is Altered by Jennifer Rush. I read this one with Rachel and with DJ from This Life in Fiction. We do a sort of paranormal book club thing, and our friend Kristen is also in it, but for this round I think it's just me and Rachel and DJ who are reading the book. Altered is a sci-fi book, and it's set in a world where there's a young woman named Anna, and she and her dad are in charge of a lab where they're watching these humans that have been experimented on.
Guinea pigs? That's terrible. That's terrible.
They basically...
Test subjects.
Yes, test subjects is a good term. They've basically gotten enhanced in different abilities, and so they're being monitored by Anna and her dad up until the day that the government agency that has been funding this whole shtick, or the agency that's been funding this whole project, decides that they want to reclaim their property, and the boys break out, and the dad lets them go, but he says that they have to bring his daughter with them. And so now they're on the run, and the whole story is just them trying to figure out, well, Anna, the main character, trying to figure out what's really going on, what the history is with these guys, like what they're gonna do now, obviously, because they're on the run, and it's fascinating. I actually listened to this one on audio, and I just could not stop once I started it because I really needed to know what would happen. I haven't read a sci-fi book like this in a long time, but it was so entertaining. I think it helps that there were a lot of like characters that I could be really interested in. And like, yes, like Maki was saying, there's a great twist to this story. Unexpected for me, just because I don't read so much in the genre, so I was kind of like, huh, that's nice and neat. I really enjoyed everything about this. It was very exciting, very compelling. I enjoyed the characters. I like seeing their relationships develop. I thought it was really compelling for something that was written nearly 10 years ago, so very good. Very much looking forward to reading the rest of the series, which I immediately bought after reading this first one, so you can tell how much I enjoy that. Would highly recommend checking this out if you haven't already. I know it's an older one. I know a lot of people have already read it and loved it. I am new to this fandom, so pardon me while I gush about it, because objectively speaking, it's just great. Like, the storytelling is solid, the character work is solid,
world building's
everything is pretty interesting. The world building is also very solid. So everything about this book is like a solid win in my book. Definitely check it out. Wow, I said in my book twice. We're going to talk about a book that I recently finished reading, and that's The Shadow of Kyoshi by FCE with Avatar co-creator Michael Dante DiMartino.
Yeah.
And this is part 2 of Avatar Kyoshi's story, and it was really good. I still think the first one might have been my favorite, but in this story we actually get to explore more of Kyoshi, embracing her Avatar duties and also grappling with what that really means. She's had an unusual Avatar journey to begin with, so it stands to reason that most of the things she's been doing as the Avatar are also unusual, and that she's a little bit flaily because a lot is going on. A lot of this book takes place in the Fire Nation, which is an interesting thing that I never thought was going to happen. And I did really enjoy it. Like, once I started reading it, I just got swept right up into the story. Once again, it's Avatar, so like all of the hallmarks of that world and like the nations in it and the characters in it, all of the things that you sort of know from the show are kind of put on the page, and I love that. And the storytelling style, again, this would lend itself very well to being animated. My god, if they would animate it, that would be so great. And the characters have always been my favorite part of Avatar stories, and I think it's what really draws me in, whether it is Aang's arc or Korra's arc or Kyoshi's arc. The characters are the part that interests me. So that definitely is what drew me into this story. And the actual plot itself was solid, but I do think things might have wrapped up just a touch too quickly for my liking. And I feel like it almost feels unfinished in a way, which makes sense because this is just the beginning of Kyoshi's journey. She's got a lot of stuff going on and a lot of stuff to do. So I did really enjoy it. I'm glad I finally read it, but I do think the first one is still a little bit better than this one.
I'm pleased to report that the few things that Alexa were able to sort of confirm for me, though she didn't spoil absolutely anything necessary, there's a lot of Van and Kyoshi in there, and I love that. And for those of you who don't know what I'm talking about, just go to Tumblr. Just look for Kyoshi and look all of the shit posting that happens about Kyoshi, and they're just beautiful. Anyway.
Alright, this next section before we get to the Grishaverse is actually a Brandon Sanderson section.
Please, that's
so
not
I
his
read
real name.
2 books. I read Alcatraz versus the Evil Librarians, and I also read The Way of Kings. So let's talk about Alcatraz first. So this is a book that Mackie picked for me to read when I was putting my list together this year, and I'm so glad I did because it was really fun. Like, it is the...
It's bananas, isn't it?
So most of the time I prefer my stories where I really am more attached to the characters, even if the plot is kind of slow. Like, if I love the characters, I will be, you know, pretty on board with the story. In this case, it was the opposite. The plot was so much fun that I was like, let me just get dragged along by the shenanigans, because literally this entire story is hijinks. Because Alcatraz, who is the actual author of this story,
King of hijinks.
Mind you, oh, I'm sorry, this is probably gonna get censored by the Librarians now.
Be careful.
Just kidding.
This is
so
an
Brandon
broadcast
Sanderson,
from the freelance.
Brandon Sanderson tells the story of Alcatraz. No last names here, so that, you know, slight less censorship. He discovers that he is one in a long line of people who are tasked with defending the freelance, yes? From the Librarians. And yes, if that sounds a little zany to you, there's a reason for everything, and it sort of gets revealed throughout the course of the book. I honestly didn't know too much about it going into it, except for that very basic premise, and it made the journey even more of a delight. There's a specific brand of humor in these novels, and it runs the spectrum from like really zany to just sarcastic and witty, and I think it's just a spectrum that Mackie is particularly well versed in. So
how about I live there?
Exactly.
That's exactly.
And it's funny because I obviously have been around Mackie long enough to have picked up on some of this humor, so it's equally funny to me now. I do love the level of shenanigans and also like the tongue-in-cheek narration. I think that the narrative voice and the character voice, author voice, is very well done, because it feels almost like a running commentary on what exactly is going on now, with also a lot of like hints at the future, which is on the one hand great, on the other hand you're like, why are you dropping this now when I'm not gonna get any of those in the book? Suffice to say, I read it really quickly. It's a middle grade book, so it does read a little quicker than, you know, heavy, chunky adult books. And it was a lot of fun. I am looking forward to seeing what happens next with all of the hints that were dropped that I did not get to see in this book. So, if you're looking for a new middle grade series to try out, definitely check out this one. It does read a little bit on the older middle grade side. I think a lot of the humor would appeal to older readers. I think even adults could read this one and find it funny, so yeah. Definitely check that out. And of course, we're going to talk about the tome that is The Way of Kings, which is the first in the Stormlight Archive. This is a 1,000-page book. It took me a month to read it, and not because I wasn't enjoying it, but because it's a lot. It is the setup for the entire Stormlight Archive series. We're introduced to 3 characters specifically. There's Kaladin, there's Dalinar, and there's Shallan. And the 3 characters are doing different things. Dalinar is a general in the king's army. He is fighting in the war, also trying to cancel the king. But he's having visions, and he can't quite reconcile what's going on in the visions with what's currently happening in real life. Then we have Kaladin, who is a slave. He has become one of the bridge crews that run bridges back and forth for the warlords. And he is despairing because up until now, all that his life has ever brought feels like a curse to him, because he keeps losing people that he cares about and wants to see. And then we have Shallan, who is sent on a... I don't know if she's sent on the mission or if she decides that she's the perfect person for this mission. She decides to go after someone who has a relic that she and her family need in order to restore their fortunes. And she has to infiltrate by becoming this person's student so that she can steal the thing she needs. Except that she realizes there's more going on than she anticipated. Actually, all 3 of them realize that. And it's interesting to me because their stories are so separate and so, you know, apart for a good chunk of the book, but I never felt bored no matter whose perspective we were in. It was fascinating to learn about the world through each of their eyes. There's also a couple of interludes from other characters and perspectives that really helped with that. And there's also enough time to form a relationship between, you know, the character-reader relationship where you get really invested in what's going on in the character's life. There was enough time to do that with all 3 of them, and I really appreciated that. This story is epic in scope, and you can already sense it right from the beginning. I don't normally really go for war books. That is a thing that I'm not really into, if I'm being honest. But for some reason, this one I was like, yeah, I'll read pages about them practicing their, you know, whatever moves they need to make. Yeah, I'll read pages about war skirmishes, sure I will. And And that's just a testament to how Brandon Sanderson writes, I guess, because I was just interested right from the get-go. So I'm glad I finally picked this one up, even though it was definitely an investment of my time. I certainly plan on continuing the series, even though apparently this is going to be a 10-book series and I only have 4 books right now. There are only 4 books right now. The 4th book came out last year. So I'm gonna take it slow, but suffice to say, like, I can see why everyone loves it so much. I really loved it too. So far of all the Sanderson things I've read, this is my favorite.
Well, that's
so
cool.
I'm really looking forward to continue on with the series.
That
Who knew I was gonna like adult fantasy so much?
You would like Brandon said, I'm sorry, Alcatraz Smedley.
Smedry.
Smedry? Smedley? Smedry. Smedry. Alright,
Rude.
There you go. Okay, cool. So shall we move on to our road to Rule of Wolves?
Yes, let's move on to the Grishaverse. I think Maki has a bit of an interlude.
So I almost feel like I default back to Estelle Getty in Golden Girls. Picture this, Sicily, only picture this. It was the end of Shadow and Bone. And there we were, devastated completely, finding ourselves in love with Mal and Alina. Like, that never happened. And not because we didn't like them, it was just, alright, you poor kids, hope it works out for you. That was basically the general, like, consensus when Alexa had read Shadow and Bone ages ago.
Yeah.
And reread Shadow and Bone ages ago and all the way to now. But then suddenly here we are, clutching each other as Mal and Alina try to reach hands. And so I'm like, this is not cool.
Understatement.
So, just for our studio audience. So apparently, Alexa had read King of Scars and Rule of Wolves by the time we finished Shadow and Bone, so she has all of this rattling around in her noggin and her feelings. As we were sort of like watching, you know, all of that stuff. I, on the other hand, knew that I had to read Rule of Wolves. Alexa was very adamant. I remember her screaming and yelling and crying. And like just downright almost throwing the book like down like that one. She's like, I
avoided it for a whole day.
She's like, I can't proceed. And so I'm like, I gotta get myself in it. But then I couldn't just let it go. So I ended up reading right after Shadow and Bone. I had to read Siege and Storm, Ruin and Rising again. Boy, am I glad that I did, because as I was reading, I remember very, very clearly, especially after I read King of Scars, I have been on team Zelensky-Lensov 2021 for years now. In fact, all of 2020, you will find me every so often mentioning, you know, Zelensky-Lensov 2021, which is when Rule of Wolves is coming out, and of course the election, blah blah blah, that kind of thing. So I thought that would be great. So what do I think now of reading Siege and Storm and Ruin and Rising right one after the other? It's a really neatly done story, isn't it? It's a very, very neatly, tightly, like sort of like buttoned up and woven kind of thing. Very, very good tale. Lovely world building as always. Shout out to all the Darkling fans. I get it. I do. More power to you. Not really on that boat, but respect. So the road to Rule of Wolves, you can see, and I will mention this a little bit, Zelensky has a few choice thoughts about a young king, heir apparent Lensov. I gotta say, my ship could be said to have started sailing here. So,
anyway, before we get to that, in case you didn't already know, we have a vlog for when we watched Shadow and Bone. I'll link that down below. But also, in case you somehow haven't heard of it, Shadow and Bone is the first book in that series, and it is about a young girl named Alina who gets suddenly revealed to be the Sun Summoner. And this puts her in close quarters with the Darkling, who is the leader of an army full of Grisha like her, who can manipulate different things.
Yeah. The human body, forces the elements.
Except that the Darkling has a bigger plot afoot, and Alina gets dragged right into it and has to make some choices by the end of the first book.
Yeah, and all of those choices get to a head. So,
rolling right along
to King of Scars. Something that both Alexa and I had.
See that?
Something that Alexa and I had both read. Obviously, her with this lovely tome, me on my Kindle because that's just how I roll. It's just such a, you know,
I liked it more this time around. I liked it a lot the first time I read it, but this second time I read it,
it's like a fine wine, isn't it? It just sort of ages well, because this one obviously focuses on the current King of Ravka.
Yes. This is 2 years after the events of, I want to say, the Ruin and Rising. It's
Okay.
a couple of years later.
Yeah.
The king of Ravka is now Nikolai Lantsov, and he is struggling to hold on to that throne because of a variety of reasons. First of all,
several reasons. There was the power vacuum that the Darklings sort of had left. The Civil War wasn't exactly the greatest thing for any economy.
And now there's the whole
And
international
then
war.
neighboring kingdoms around them are ready to tear a very weakened Ravka apart, and it is up to the sly fox of a king.
Who is also being torn apart internally.
That's a good segue. By the aftermath, there's a reason they call him King of Scars. The aftermath of the war left him like physically, spiritually even scarred, where he doesn't know what to do with himself with that sort of like the remnant of darkness that is within him, part of the fold, and the evil therein is sort of like.
So this book basically follows Nikolai as he's journeying to keep a hold of his throne and to fight off all the things. By his side is General Zoya Nazilensky, who is very capable. And we also have another plot woven in for Nina Zenik, who you meet in the Six of Crows duology.
And
she is now a servant to the crown, basically.
Yeah.
And she is their spy in Fjerda, where she discovers that there is something she can do that only she can do, and she decides to go for it and make things happen.
And so begins Leigh Bardugo's sort of like successful venture into several concurrent plot lines.
Yeah.
The first 3 books, it was just all Alina's perspective.
Yes.
And that was cool. And then for Six of Crows and Crooked Kingdom, there you would cut to the different parts of the mission, but everyone sort of had one holistic sort of like goal.
Yes.
Here, Leigh Bardugo masterfully begins her change of or shift in style to everybody has different stories. It just so happens that Zoya's and Nikolai's sort of happen concurrently in the same sort of area, but these are gonna sort of like go and intertwine and weave and cross, and it's just this it's just beautiful combination of concurrent lives.
I mean, I like this one better this time around because the first time I'd read it, I think everyone had gone in with the impression it was just going to be about Nikolai because that's how it had been marketed. It was the Nikolai story. It was the Nikolai story. And while it is a big chunk of it is Nikolai's story, it's not just about Nikolai.
Much bigger than
and that makes sense in hindsight because Nikolai is not. He doesn't live just for himself. He lives for Ravka.
Exactly. Everything
so
this man does.
It actually makes sense that his story would involve all of the parts or all of the people who are working hard to keep Ravka intact.
That's right.
So, you know, King of Scars is great. Still got very emotional, even though I knew it was going to happen in it. However.
Which leads us to finally the conclusion.
Rule of Wolves. So, preface this by saying, if you want to hear more spoilery thoughts, we actually did 2 podcast episodes with our friend Danica where we just went deep dive.
It was 2 hours long each, guys.
I mean, like, it was funny because we were supposed to deep dive into Rule of Wolves, but I feel like we ended up being, like, deep dive into the Grishaverse almost.
Which we almost have no choice because the only way to really fully appreciate Rule of Wolves is in the context of the larger journey that we've had over the last 5 books, right? Well, 6 technically. So, you know, you just gotta enjoy it that way. And if you jump straight into Rule of Wolves just from King of Scars, I mean,
I did it.
All right, sure. But as somebody who sort of had to at least, you know, because technically Crooked Kingdom and Six of Crows didn't really sort of like bridge too much of the story, but to have that history of Ravka fresh on the brain really gives it a different flavor, I gotta say.
Yes, I agree, because all of the foundation that was built in every single book in the Grishaverse from the beginning up until now really lends itself to the epic scale that this book takes. This is another war book, you guys. Like,
oh boy.
Again, with me not normally reading war books, and for some reason, if it's by certain authors, I'm like, sure, give me more of those strategy meetings and these like random skirmishes.
I do like those.
I
do like those every so often.
I think Rule of Wolves is definitively a triumph in the way that it wraps up Nikolai, Zoya, and Nina's stories, because it does it in a way that feels, to me, it feels true to each of their characters. I know a lot of people will disagree, especially when it comes to Nikolai, but personally I think like he did exactly, it turned out for him exactly as it was going to have to turn out for him, and in a way that made sense, you know?
Right, and what as I've learned recently from the Friends reunion, it is important to sort of end things at a certain point where unraveling the good things that have brought you to that point is the only way you're going to have more stories. What Leigh Bardugo has masterfully done is to give a wrap up, a very nice stopping point to all of these characters while living in a world where you don't need to unravel anything because the world was pretty frayed from the start. So not only does Rule of Wolves give you a definitive sort of like bookend to the journeys of Nina, Zoya, and Nikolai, it actually opens up the world.
And gives you the possibility of more stories.
More. And we're going to leave it at that. The full spoilers are in the podcast. But yeah, it's a masterclass, I want to say, in world building and character development, where you can give your characters a good ending, but then open it up for, but we can have more. And it's not going to be forced. It's not going to be like the Fullbring arc. So, Bleach fans, anyone? So, highly recommended.
So good. It was so good, you guys. Like, screamed, laughed, cried, yelled. Also did not read it for an entire day because I was like, nope, too traumatized.
One night.
So.
Just all the way.
Excellent.
Straight on through till morning.
Anyway, those are all the books that we're going to talk about in this particular episode of What We Read. If you have strong Grisha-verse feelings that you feel so entitled to share, please do. Or check out the podcast because it was very fun.
Those are our Grisha.
It was really fun.
There was a lot of yelling, yeah.
But I feel like, and it was really fun, and it was also like a deep dive into how we felt about things in that series. So I would highly recommend checking it out. I'm going to link that down below. If you have feelings about all the other books that I talked about, feel free to also mention those. I enjoyed all of the other books that I read as well, so if you want to talk about them, definitely leave a comment down below.
Cool.
Don't forget to like and subscribe, and if you want to find us on other social media, those are always included down below in the links. And we'll see you guys with a new video soon. Bye!